Today we're going to talk about something pretty radical. The idea that public safety has just as much to do with what's on our plates as it does with police on our streets.
I mean, really think about that for a second. What if one of the biggest drivers of crime is hiding in plain sight, right there in our food? It's a provocative question for sure, but the science we're about to get into suggests it's one we really can't afford to ignore.
Okay, so let's break this down. When you think about what causes crime, what pops into your head? Probably all the stuff on the left, right? Poverty, a lack of education, a breakdown in morality. These are the usual suspects we've been talking about for decades. But what if there's this whole other side to the story? A hidden factor that's not about sociology, but about physiology. Not about bad morals, but about bad nutrition that messes with our ability to control our impulses.
Okay, so that's a pretty big claim. Where's the proof? Let's get into the science, because this is where it gets really interesting. And believe it or not, this whole story starts in a place you might not expect, inside the walls of prisons and juvenile detention centers. A criminologist named Schoenthaler had this hypothesis about the connection between diet and behavior, and he decided to put it to the test.
So here's what they did, and it was actually pretty brilliant in its simplicity. They ran what's called a randomized controlled trial, the gold standard for this kind of research. They took a bunch of inmates, split them into two groups. One group got a daily supplement with basic vitamins and minerals. The other group got a placebo, basically a sugar pill. And that's it. Everything else about their lives stayed exactly the same. The only thing that changed was the supplement.
And the result? Well, it was this number, 37%. Just let that number hang there for a second. A 37% change in what exactly?
That's a 37% drop in violent acts and other serious rule breaking. Let that sink in for a moment. They didn't hire new guards, they didn't start some new therapy program. All they did was hand out a simple, cheap nutritional supplement, and violent behavior plummeted. And this wasn't just a fluke. They saw this effect again and again.
So you're probably wondering, what was the magic formula in these pills? Well, it wasn't anything exotic or complicated. We're talking about essential micronutrients like iron, zinc, magnesium, and B vitamins, the absolute basic building blocks our brains need to work right.
Okay, so we know what worked, but the big question is, how? How can a simple nutrient deficiency lead to such a massive change in behavior? Let's take a look at what's happening to a brain that's basically running on fumes.
It's literally like a biological chain reaction, a series of dominoes falling. It usually kicks off with a diet that's full of ultra-processed foods, which, are notoriously low in these key minerals. That deficiency then messes with the brain's ability to make neurotransmitters. Those are the chemicals that control your mood and your decisions. So the part of your brain that's supposed to say, hey, maybe don't do that, the prefrontal cortex, it gets weaker. And what you get is a hair trigger response. You're way more likely to lash out.
And this isn't just a theory, You can actually measure this stuff. Studies have found these direct links over and over again. When your iron levels drop below a certain point, for example, aggression scores go up. Low zinc is directly linked to having a hard time paying attention and making good decisions. And if you're not getting enough magnesium, your body's stress response goes into overdrive. These are real physiological states with real-world consequences.
And this brings us to a really crucial shift in thinking. For a lot of these smaller offenses, vandalism, a bar fight, petty theft, the issue might not be some kind of cold, calculated criminal intent. It's more like a brain that physically can't hit the brakes on a bad impulse. It's a hardware problem, not just a software one.
So, when you put all these pieces together, what do you get? Well, you get a whole new way of looking at crime, a new theory that puts our physiology right at the center of the conversation.
So here's the core argument, the big what if. What if some of the increase we see in minor, impulsive crime isn't really a sign that society is falling apart morally? What if it's actually a symptom of a growing number of people whose brains are literally being starved of the nutrients they need for basic self-control? This leads us to a fundamental choice in how we create a safe society. The traditional way, more policing, more prisons, is entirely reactive. It's what we call a post-crime cost. It's the ambulance waiting at the bottom of the cliff. Nutritional intervention, on the other hand, is a pre-crime cost. It's proactive. It's about building a fence at the top of the cliff so people don't fall in the first place.
All right, so if we accept this science, then what's next? What can we actually do with this information? How do we start building a society that's safer from the ground up?
And the amazing thing is, the solutions aren't some complicated pie-in-the-sky fantasy. They're actually super practical and, frankly, pretty cheap. We're talking about simple tweaks like upping the mineral standards for school lunches, or making sure that food given out in welfare programs is fortified with these key nutrients. And of course, taking what we learned in those prison studies and actually applying it to all correctional facilities.
And when you look at the cost, it's just a no-brainer. The investment for this stuff is a tiny, tiny fraction of the billions we pour into policing and prisons every year. We're talking about pennies a day per person for food programs that could stop crime before it even starts.
So I'll just leave you with this final thought. We spend so much time and energy engineering our physical world for stability, right? We design bridges to be safe, power grids to be reliable. Isn't it time we started treating our nutritional environment like the piece of critical infrastructure it is and started designing it with the same care and intention?